People can hear me now. Marvellous, marvellous, marvellous. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of editing on this webinar to make sure that it works for you. Thank you so much for hanging in there, the people who did. We've obviously had a bit of a tech issue there with the volume and the audio here, so I do apologise. I've been talking to you for the last 5 minutes or so, so I am so sorry that that's happened to you. But I'm going to start the webinar again and just condense some of what I was doing at the beginning there so that you can catch exactly what's been going on. Thank you so much for letting me know. I really appreciate it. Look, this whole notion, I guess, of building a respectful school, and what I want to emphasise to you today is that I actually think that of the words that are on the screen for you right now, the important ones are not so much the grey ones, the title of the webinar. I think the important words here are the strapline, the orange words there, which is how we take respect from being a hope for the future to a cultural reality. And unfortunately, I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my grumpy pants on a little bit to start this webinar. I'm going to throw some rocks, and I'm going to be a little bit provocative because, to be honest, why not use January as a chance to sharpen our tools on a little bit of provocation? And what I genuinely believe is that schools have gone down the path of establishing values over the last 20 or 30 years and walked that path in entirely the wrong direction. What I think we've done is we've established values that we believe would improve our school and words that, if they manifested in our school, would make our schools a better place, but we haven't focused on what are the behaviours that make those words a reality. Now, the reason I say that is because I guess what I could have done today is build a webinar that's all about how you establish your values, and we're going to do that at some stage this year. But today, the reason I picked on respect is because respect is the one for a couple of reasons. Respect, first of all, is the most common Australian school value. It stands on the podium with responsibility and with excellence. And at the same time, that seems incongruent to me with the whole notion that when I do run presentations and when I work with people, with groups of school leaders all around Australia, I regularly test this. And I ask them if they think we have an issue with respect in Australian schools, and almost universally they tell me that they believe we do. Now, that's not to say that there isn't any respect in our schools. What it is to say that we're sort of getting a sense, the people who are educators and the people who are leaders are sort of getting a sense that the behaviours that would comprise respect, such as being able to focus on others more than self, such as being able to focus on the long term rather than the short term, such as having high expectations of each other and of ourselves, and such as holding ourselves to holding others to standards that we certainly are keeping first, that the compulsion to do that is drifting away just a little bit in not only our students, but in the adults in our school environments as well. So we're very focused here on this webinar on respect, because if we've got a problem with it, how is it that respect is the most common Australian value? So what I'm saying is that they're actually not our values when we declare respect, responsibility, or even excellence. I'm saying that they're aspirations, and they make wonderful signs, but they don't necessarily connect to a cultural reality, which means that we're not seeing and hearing people demonstrating these behaviours regularly. So today's webinar is about, can we start to walk this path along becoming a respectful school, not from the idea of building aspiration and then hoping it happens by putting the sign up, but by saying, how can we focus on a simple, executable, deployable behavioural shift in the people in our school community, such that we start to walk towards that label of being a respectful school. That's our ambition for today. I guess what I also want to point out is people have been talking about respect for a really long time. Aretha Franklin is a mighty fine example. She was asking, and I didn't pick on Aretha today or choose her picture for this because of the title of her song, Respect. I love the next line, which is find out what it means to me. And I think that that's one of the things that we've failed to do in Australian schools, is we've failed to say, okay, we've got this thing called respect, but we've failed to define and make clear what respect both looks and sounds like, and that causes confusion. When we talk in terms of very broad terms that we hope will be catchment words for lots of different behaviours, such as respect and also responsibility and excellence, we confuse people because they have varying definitions of it. So one of the things I want to make very clear to you today is I think that it's really important that we get clear about what respect is, what respect does, what respect looks like, what respect sounds like in our school. in a very micro kind of way, so that how we can find those behaviours, reward them, recognise them, and then cultivate them across our school. And then we're starting to make respect a really cultural norm. One of the other people who talked about respect, and I must admit, when I started my research about today, I wasn't expecting probably to quote Tolstoy, but I really love the quote that he wrote in Anna Karenina. I can never say the title of that book correctly. And what he said was that respect was invented to cover the empty space where love should be. And I looked at a few different writings and a few different quotes about respect, and I was looking for something that would really best sum up what I was talking about here, because I think because respect has been a word that has been used so commonly, I think that one of the things we've done is we've sort of become to make it a little piecemeal in our language, and it's lost its zing. And when Tolstoy talks about it actually covering up love, I think we're starting to understand the gravitas of what respect is really all about. You know, respect is genuinely about a connection with others at a very deep level. And in such a way that, you know what, we just wouldn't dare do disrespectful things to each other because of the such strong and the such deep and the such high positive regard that we have for each other in an environment. And I think we don't want to try to cover up the fact that we really do want people to love each other. I think that, you know, when I was talking to a couple of people recently, and it sounds like a conversation that you've had late overnight over wine, but it's not. And we said, so where in the world needs more than anything right now, and we're looking at a little bit of commentary on American politics, and they just said, look, all right, we just need a bit more love, don't we? And I thought, well, I actually think that's right. I think we do. We need a deeper and a stronger and a more meaningful connection. And so I really like Tolstoy's notion that this respect isn't something that we can achieve superficially. It isn't something that we can achieve quickly. It isn't something that we should be flippant about. That respect is really about bringing more love to our schools, and that really drives me in terms of a deep and a proper purpose. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of building this webinar for you today. I guess even though I sort of mentioned before, while we're having sound issues, that it's a mighty hot day today. I'm presenting today from Melbourne, where it's 39 degrees. And so if you can hear a little background noise, we have some contractors around the office today, but I had the fan on in the office here just to try and keep the temperature down a little bit. But regardless, I am asking you for the effort today to step up a little bit here and to get involved. So I'm just, you know, it was very easy for everybody to get involved when the sound was failing on us. But now that we've got everyone back on the webinar, I really want to encourage you. There's a couple of ways to get involved. Number one is that you can put your hand up. So of all the attendees that I've got there, I can see that Andrew and Barbara are currently, you actually have your hand up. And you probably didn't mean it. You were probably trying to get my attention when there was no sound. But you can put that hand down just as easily. Well played, Barbara. And if you do put your hand up, I'm going to assume that you've got a question you want to ask or a comment you want to make, or even if you want to pick a little bit of an argument with me. That's absolutely fine. I've got to expect that if I'm going to throw some rocks today. And I have the facility here to be able to unmute you. So if you have something that you do want to ask, then put that hand up, and I'm going to unmute you so that you can make a contribution to the webinar today. I reckon that's really important. I actually think it's important that we contextualise this work. That if you want to say, yeah, but what if this happens, or you know, yeah, but in my school we've done that, or I've got an idea around that. I reckon other people are going to benefit from that on the webinar, both all of the ones that are here today, and the ones who will be watching this as a recording. So feel free to put that hand up. If you've got a question, like I said before, if you've got a tech question that you think Chris can help you with, Chris, my wonderful business manager, is in the background. Make sure that you pop it in the question box. And if you have a question for me, make sure you write it in the question box as well. And I'm going to stop periodically just to check that and make sure that if we're able to bring some context to these key points around respect today, that we absolutely seize that opportunity. Okay, really important for me. I always say in every webinar that I'm looking to differentiate these webinars. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to launch a little poll here. I want to know who I've got here today. So for me, it's important to know what your sphere of influence is, what your opportunity is to move forward and to act on this as around respect. So what I'm looking for, and I guess I'm very into social experiments too. So I'm interested to know who it is that's online today who's giving up an hour in January to talk about respect. So if you would, please note that the poll's on the screen now. Let me know what your role is and how you've come to this webinar today, what your sphere of influence is. And what I like to do is get to about 80% of participants. We're up to 67% now who've given us an answer. I can see a couple of clear themes emerging here. And then, there we go, we're past 80% now, so I can close the poll. I can share the results. I'd like all of you to also know who's in the room today. About a third of the people here who are principals or system leaders, a third who are in the teacher or an ancillary role in the school, so as well as a smattering of other people in the leadership space as well. So I'm going to try and gear the webinar a little bit around that today. I'll hide the results of that one, come back into the webinar. Just going to check, I noticed I've got a question there as well, so I just want to make sure I've got that covered. Tanya's a teacher, terrific. Close that up again, and what I want to do is just connect to the next poll here, which is, I guess I want to know what's in your head, what's your motivation, what's your problem, what are you doing, what are you doing here, what do you want to know about respect? So I've got one more poll here that'll give me an idea of what your motivation is for being here. So what I want you to do is just think about what's the one thing here that goes, yeah, that says to you, look, it may be all 5 for you, but what's the one thing here in these list of 5 that you look at and go, actually, that's what I'm looking for here. That's my problem. Defining respect across the community. Is it about having the values manifest behaviourally? Like I said, respect is a problem, but so are the other values. How do we get them above board? Is it about a lack of respect between staff or students and the way that the students demonstrate behaviour, particularly towards staff? Is it about getting the parents involved on this side of it as well, so that we feel like we're not involved in some moral tug of war about how we build respect, and we're not adversarial about the way that we get it done? So have a quick little think about that. We've got the vote up past 60% now, so looking to get to 80 if I can, and there's a very clear theme emerging here for me, which will make the rest of this webinar a very focused one. So there you go, we've hit 80%. Thank you all so much for that contribution. Close the results and share them, and well, something stands out there. It's about how we get our values to manifest behaviourally. So I hope that idea today, I thought I was throwing rocks, but it seems I've got 75% of people in the room who clearly already very much agree with me about that we've been walking the values path the wrong way. We've got our values established. The behavioural shift is the trick. It's how we get that done. Hide those results, back into the webinar, and then let's get on with it. Okay, one of the things I want to really, I guess one of the tricks of our language is that often what we've done in the past is we've associated certain behaviours with getting certain results. And what I mean by that is we connect words, if you walk quickly, you'll get fit. And the 2 words we put together when it comes to respect is that we command respect, or we demand respect. And what I want to do is tell you that we've got that bit wrong. That works in adversarial hierarchical relationships and systems. And what I mean by that is that, for instance, the military, they need to go to war, they need to defeat an enemy. It can also work in sporting organisations where a hierarchy makes it clear who's giving the orders and placing people in what positions and setting the team strategy. So that's all great. In a competitive environment, a chain of command can be a useful thing to have. In a collaborative environment, which is what a school community should be, we should be far more interested in compelling rather than commanding respect. We should be far more interested in helping people to develop respect and encouraging and motivating people to develop respect rather than the notion of commanding it or demanding it through position. What's the difference? The difference for me is about high levels of support and high levels of expectation. And in a competitive environment, you can rely on high levels of expectation. And that means that what we do in those situations is we do things to the people that we work with such that they are fearful enough to respect the power that we hold. The hallmarks of high expectation environments but low support where we rely on rank. We're very punitive about the results. We come up with stronger punishments for people the more times they get things wrong or the more times they decide to transgress. And we are very authoritarian in the way that we behave, which means that we have authority, but we have taken it through our power and not through our practice. There's a fabulous episode of the rather politically incorrect cartoon called South Park, where the character Eric gets a sense of power. Eric Cartman becomes a policeman, and he loves to get through the town telling everybody to respect my authority as he wields his baton into their shins and gives them horrible pain. He lets them know that he will continue to inflict this horrible pain upon them unless they respect his authority. And what he's looking to is to command respect and to take it through fear. What happens when we do that in teams and in organisations and in schools and in classrooms is that we drive behaviour underground, which means people try not to get caught doing the wrong thing. They try not to get caught being disrespectful. But whether we like it or not, my definition of what a culture is the behaviours that we both encourage and that we tolerate. So whether we like it or not, those behaviours exist. We would like to, one, know about them, and then two, do something about them such that they are no longer behaviours that we tolerate and they become behaviours that we are looking to encourage. And that is exactly the way that it is with respect. We don't want to drive those behaviours underground, because then we become unaware of the very culture that we're developing and that we're in charge of. The other thing I said like we do is people get labelled. So once we are hitting somebody on the head, and it becomes a very public thing as well, that we're constantly punishing our students or we're punishing our teachers for making mistakes, it's very public, such that the label sticks. So you become the screw up, you become the naughty kid, you become the aggressive kid. And once it's kind of tacitly agreed that I believe you're the aggressive kid, and that you believe you're the aggressive kid, and that everybody in your classroom believes you're the aggressive kid, there's kind of only one thing to do, and that's to get busy on being the very best aggressive kid you can possibly be. You see, once we have labels, we like to live up to them. Now, there's some very deep psychology behind this. Some of it connects to the way that people change when they become parents, is that they go from being being somebody without children to being a mother or a father. Their label changes, and therefore their behaviours change accordingly. And it stretches further across from positive behaviours like those of being a new parent through to the most negative behaviours, which is, once you're a killer, what happens is that, people, this is the psychology behind how people become serial killers, is that once I'm a killer, and people are kind of hunting this killer, and we've agreed that I'm a killer, there's only one thing to do, and that's to kill serially and to try not to get caught. So there's some very deep and some very dark even psychology that sits behind this. But what we do know is that we don't want our kids to be taking on negative labels, and we don't want them to be trying to live up to those labels once they're established. We'd rather dissolve those labels and replace them with labels such as, I work really hard, I demonstrate respect, I treat people kindly. And what happens is, once I'm a kind person, because once I have the label of a kind person, it's kind of very easy and natural to start to do those kind things. How do we encourage that? What we need to do is to match the high level of expectation, not compromise it. We want to match that high level of expectation with high levels of support. And when we do, we would describe our work, even in the restorative world, as working with people. And that means that we're very leverageable. We're very focused on leveraging relationship. So we're very focused on building and working through relationship. We're very respectful in that. If you think about the teachers that you had when you were at school, you probably would have said that they had high expectations of you. You may even say that some of your favourite teachers kicked your backside occasionally, but they also gave you all the love. And so that means that you sort of manifested slowly this high level of respect for them, because they did both, because they had very high expectations and they engendered high levels of support for you as well. And the difference between the high expectation, low support, and high expectation, high support leader or teacher is the difference between the way they achieve authority. So we don't want to achieve authority, like I mentioned before, in the way that a dictator does through our power. What we want to do is do it through our practice. And that's when we would say that we're authoritative. People really gravitate towards authoritative people. And so authoritative people develop and demonstrate a number of different behaviours. I want to get to those in the webinar today too, and make sure that you're aware of those very simple things that we can do to get started. I mentioned before that a model that I'd like to speak to here around, whoops, it's disappeared on me. There it is. that a really clever fellow called Darren Hill developed. And what Darren was trying to say to us was that if we, that in any relational system, or indeed any relationship when we get started, there's often a trade-off between conflict and trust. Now, Darren's not talking about conflict in that we're fighting actively over things. He's saying we have conflict over those big words that I mentioned before: respect, responsibility, and excellence. He's saying we just don't get it. We don't know what each other means. You know, for instance, I would talk to the fact that if my mum asked me when I got home from school as a 15-year-old, if mum asked me to be responsible when I got home, I would probably go into the street and play cricket with my mate. And the reason I would do that is because my definition for responsibility was do whatever you like, but don't break anything. Mum's definition was different. She had a bunch of things that she would hope that I would, of my own in my own self-directed way, realise that I needed, if I was going to be responsible, to come home and do a few chores around the house, and she knew exactly what those were. And the reason for that is what she did. The reason for her understanding of that is why she would begin in trying to get me to get some success in this area as a 15-year-old with what we call at the bottom of Hill's model there, content behaviours. They're wildly specific, which means that my mum would never let me walk out of the door to go to Frankston High in Year 9 and say to me, Adam, you need to be responsible when you get home. She would say, Adam, when you get home, you need to put your shoes in your bedroom, you need to put your lunch scraps in the bin, you need to put your bag away, you need to mow the lawn, do 30 minutes of homework, and only then, once you have done those 5 things, may you go into the street and play cricket with Brett Chard. And she would make me repeat the list. She would put the list on a piece of paper with check boxes next to it and leave it on the bench for me when I got home. And I think that what Mum was looking for was the opportunity to thank and congratulate me for getting one of them right. I think that what she was hoping for is that she could look into the backyard and see some short grass, and then she could look at me and say, good job on the lawn, mate. And in that moment, my tail wags a little bit and I get a little bit happier. And what happens is we start to move up the model. The conflict gets a little smaller and the trust gets a little larger. You see, trust is built on the opportunity to thank and congratulate other people for what they, for doing something very specific that you value and wish them to do again. Hill says we don't jump all the way to the top of the model and demonstrate values, or as he refers to them as traits. Hill says we go through a transition phase in the middle where we're not quite sure, so we have labels for words here, but labels for behaviours here that encompass only a small number of behaviours. My best example of this would be early childhood teachers who teach our prep children inside voices. So inside voices is a label that has 3 components in it, and they're 3 components that prep children don't have on arrival. They don't have a volume slider, they only have a switch. They're either on loud or off completely. And so what they teach them is to get the volume, if they want attention, they need to get the volume right, they need to put their hand up, and they need to wait to be spoken to. And that comprises the label that we're talking about there, which is inside voices. And it's only when we get success with those transitioning type labels with a small number of behaviours in them that we can actually work up to the notion of really fabulous values that are comprising of a large number of behaviours in our school that people are very clear sit under the values descriptor. So hugely important. I think this is my driving model for the way that we should be developing values. We should firstly be thinking about what are the behaviours that we wish to see, and then we should be saying, what is the big label that would sit over a whole bunch of those values? How could we categorise them? Rather than saying, how do we get respect now? How on earth do we work out what it is in our school? So it's a really key and fundamental point. And while it is a key and fundamental point, it needn't be so enormous. It needn't feel dangerous or that there's a lot of trepidation about it. One of the best examples, if I was to give you an example here and now about what I believe is what I think has been a wonderful one that I saw online of a school in the United States, was a school that said, okay, it was a school with the value of respect listed as and put up on signs around the school, but was clearly a school where there was very little respect happening. There was actually the opposite. There was violence towards teachers. There were drug deals, there were gangs, there was all sorts of issues around attendance and engagement and performance in the school, as you can possibly imagine. A new principal arrived at the school and asked what the values were, and he was told that one of them was respect, and he obviously noted that, yeah, that's not working out so well. So what did he do about it? Instead of standing up at assembly and preaching to people about respect, instead of trying to crack down on disrespectful behaviours, therefore shining a light on those behaviours and priming people to demonstrate more of them, instead of running an event on a Wednesday afternoon where they would go out onto the school oval and put their bodies into the word respect, or or running a program on a Wednesday where they made a poster and put that up around the school, he took a simpler and more micro approach. He brought some students in who were in one of the graphic art classes in about year 10, and they designed a brand new logo for the school. And he told these students, the logo you design is going to be adopted right across the school. Go and talk to people, go and consult with people, find out what they're looking for in the logo. And they launched this project to have a logo that was representative of all the students in the school. And once the logo was designed, he brought in a local artist who went to every single classroom in the school, and in the doorway of every classroom, in the lino on the doorway, he carved the new logo onto the ground. And the first step, pun intended, the first step in demonstrating respect in our school was that we don't step on our logo. Every student agreed that we don't step on their logo. That's respect. You designed that logo. It's your logo. You own it. Do not let people step on our logo. We show respect and we go over the top of our logo. And that doesn't sound like it's a particularly respectful behaviour to me, to just take one large step as you enter the classroom. But what it did was it enabled all of the teachers in that school to be able to thank and congratulate students who did it as they walked into the classroom. Previous to this, all of the teachers were, as students entered the classroom, were saying things like, no pushing, stop that, cut that out, take your seats quickly, please, come on, enough of that. And what it gave them was the opportunity to thank and congratulate, thereby building trust, and thereby making it explicit to the students that respect is demonstrated with a small behaviour, and then acknowledging it and rewarding them for that, which I think is really important. And I say that quite explicitly. I want to touch on that for a moment, the notion that it is okay to reward extrinsically while you're getting this going. When you're trying to make something as big as a value happen, you've got to get people's attention. Now, staff rooms around Australia are full of debates around extrinsic versus intrinsic rewards and what's the value of one over the other. And the truth is that the research on them and the psychology behind them is reasonably clear now. Extrinsic rewards are valuable for getting people to commence a desired behaviour. So even think back to yourself in your career. When you decided to become a teacher, you probably had a big purpose sitting behind you. But one of the urgencies around going and getting a job as a teacher was that I need to get paid. I need to pay rent. I need to pay my insurance. I need to pay for petrol. I need to pay for food. We need an extrinsic reward to get that going, and in time we transition off that. You might get a little bit of money in the bank if you're lucky, and therefore in time when people ask you why you're a teacher, it's not for every second Thursday, it's because I have a real passion for putting people on a positive life trajectory, and that bigger purpose takes over, and it's such as the way that it is for kids too. So what we want to do around extrinsic rewards is, when we're looking to try and have the behaviour rewarded and demonstrated regularly at the start, we need to reward regularly too. So try to catch them every single time. Just go nuts. Whatever the rewards are, get it out there. My methodology for thinking about extrinsic rewards and bringing it to attention is that I use the 3 R's, which is what I like to do is to reward regularly, and then randomly, and then rarely. So what we do is we wean them away from the extrinsic reward far more onto the intrinsic reward. And that's why, because the reward for actually demonstrating that behaviour has not become receiving something externally from other people. It's because it's an internal thing that it makes me feel good and it helps me with my life. And that's a long-term approach. So what I want to be really clear about the extrinsic versus intrinsic debate is that extrinsic rewards are fantastic for commencing, for getting it started, for getting the ball rolling. As you remove the rewards, we want the intrinsic to take over. And as you middle there, a bit like Hill's model with context behaviours, in the middle you might want to reward just every now and then, but you also want to transition to the, hey, didn't that feel good? To be able to do that. And you eventually start to have it as something that appears occasionally, that appears more regularly in their life without requiring the reward. Regularly, randomly, and then rarely is the way to go when it comes to rewarding people for getting a target behaviour on the agenda. One of the other things I also want to encourage you to do, one of the most clever things that I think the principal at in the United States that I mentioned earlier did was he made it very clear that the students were going to be the ones that provide the impetus for this. They designed the logo. And I think it's really important that we have strong student input and collaboration. In fact, if you can get them to start the whole thing off, then that's a fantastic thing to do. One of the things that we did when I was a principal at a school called Ludmilla Primary School in the Northern Territory of Australia was we didn't have any defined values, so we decided to go down that path and see if we could get something going. But instead of just coming up with the values themselves and then maybe a definition that sat under them, what we did was we'd come up with two definitions. So we had a definition that the staff and the school council and a few parents that we had around the place also came in and worked with us on. So for each of our 5 values, we had an adult definition, and then we took those values and we took the definitions that we'd come up with as adults and put them on a table, and then just invited about a dozen kids of all different ages to come into the room, and we said, now could you write down what you think those words mean to kids? Could you fill the third column? So we had 2 definitions. We had a definition for adults and we had a definition for kids. And we told them we wanted to be able to make sure that all of the definitions there, 10 definitions, were definitions that we could see people do. So we didn't want to be so broad. The value itself gives you the broadness. Saying respect on its own gives you the broadness. What we need to do from that is to get much narrower such that people have a stepping in point. So some of our behaviours were, for instance, one of our values in the school was collaboration. And so what we put the kids wrote as their value was that we always help each other when there's a problem. We need to be able to see that happening, which I thought was a clever one. I actually think it was better than the adult definition, which escapes my mind at the moment. Okay, it's so important to define if we want to be able to say we've conquered that value. We did it. We made it happen in our school. So I guess what I want to do just to conclude today is remind you that working to respect is about a simple formula for me. It's high expectation and high support. I want to run a little exercise with you today. If you've still got your question box open, I want to ask you to just think for a minute, if you would, about somebody who you greatly respect. It can be a teacher from your past, but it could also be somebody from your life. It could be a colleague that you have now. It could be a family member. I want you to draw that person's face up in your head for me at the moment and think about who they are and what made them who they are. And I want you to think about for me, if you would, the three or four little things that they did that kind of compelled you to respect them. Not commanded, not demanded respect. The 3 or 4 things they did that kind of compelled you to respect them. And I also want you to think for me, if you would, out of a little list that you've got going in your head now, which one was the most important? Which one thing that they did? Which one quality about them? Which one simple thing that they did stood alone? Which one thing made you go, yeah, that's the reason that I respected them? And if you've got that in your head, I want to give you just a little moment here. I want you to put that word for me in the question box while you've got just a moment to do that. What's the little thing? What's the simple thing that that person did that made you go, wow, I respect them because they had that about them? You know, I always think about one of the people that whenever I do this exercise, I think about my father. And one thing that I value so much about my dad is his calmness. His ability to stay calm under pressure is something that I aspire to. So thank you, Tonya, who said here that it's feeling valued. Mark saying it's consistency is such an important thing. Andrew saying is that they listened and encouraged. Christopher's saying about humility. Eileen saying generosity with their time. So we can see some really fabulous examples there. Thank you so much for your contribution, everyone. There's been some research done into this in the school environment by the people in the various restorative bodies around the world, and they've come up with this list, which I find a fascinating one. And probably there's a couple here that I want to tap into before we finish up today. When I bring this up on a screen and I do so in my restorative practices training, one of the things I often do is I say that when I present this list, and there's a number of things here that really do quite remarkably line up with what you've been putting in that question box for me, I often say to people, there's usually I sometimes cruelly say an old salt, somebody who's experienced, somebody who's been around the block a bit like me. And they usually point to two things in that list that are of particular importance and intrigue to them. And they say that matters more than people understand. And the two things that they point towards, first of all, they're in the first column where they say firm and fair. They say that the real compulsion, and this goes completely to me to the whole heading of this slide, which is about high expectations and high support. High expectations is the firm, high support is the fair. When we bring those things together, we just get respect. We can't help it. For me, respect doesn't exist in an environment where the expectations are low or where they are lowered because of excuses or because of an ability to tolerate poor behavioural choices. But at the same time, those expectations mean very little unless they're married with a high level of support, and that's where the fairness comes in. Firmness is about boundaries, about limits, about expectations, and about pressure. Fairness is about support, encouragement, and nurturing, cushioning those expectations. The second thing that people often point at is that one in the middle there that you can see around apologising and being vulnerable. If we want our students to be lifelong learners, if we want them to shake negative labels, if we want them to be able to take different turns and directions in their lives, we need to show them that we can do the same thing. We model lifelong learning so well when it comes to the curriculum. We teach students how to reread. We teach them how to recognise mistakes in their mathematical processes. We teach them spelling rules so that they can apply it in different parts of their lives from that very moment on. But rarely as teachers do we apologise for our conduct. When we get it wrong, when we get a little emotional, if we make a mistake, it is so important to be vulnerable enough to say, you know what, I've messed up there. I'm really sorry, and I'm going to make you a promise I'm going to try a little bit harder about that from now on. And when we do that, we demonstrate our ability to push respect outwardly to others. And for me, that's the whole notion of compelling respect. To get respect, you've got to be prepared to give it first. There are three key stakeholder groups within any school community and as a result, any school culture. And they're quite obviously our staff, our students and our parents. There's only one of them that can get the respect ball moving, and that's the staff. We have to be the ones to change first. And if we can be diligent and committed enough email from us from this webinar today, that you make the most of signing up for that one too. Hey, I'll let you off the hook. All right. Thank you so much for giving up a hot January afternoon to immerse in this today. Here's how you can check out what we're doing. Here's how you can get in touch. And thank you so much for your participation and for dealing with the tech issues. We'll be in touch. Talk to you soon.